What we see in the research time and time and time again is that if you give sensitive people the same kind of supportive environment that would put anybody ahead, it rockets them way farther ahead than anyone else. So, for example, in sensitive children, you give them a nurturing, loving, well, you can't just give that to them in the lab, but if the ones who happen to have a nurturing, loving home life in their family, that helps any kid do better at school, but sensitive kids will become the top achievers in their class.
Hello, everyone. This is Kathy Caprino, and welcome to my podcast, Finding Brave. I've created this show for everyone who longs to create something bold and brave in their life, to rise up, speak up, and stand up for who they are, and to reach their highest and biggest visions. Each week, I'll be speaking with inspiring guests from all walks of business, leadership, entertainment, the creative arts, and the entrepreneurial world. And they'll be sharing their intimate stories of finding brave and offer their best strategies for building your most rewarding, joyful, and meaningful life, business, and career. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Finding Brave. So happy that you're here. And I have a feeling that at least 1/3 of you, because I think that's the statistics we're going to share, are going to resonate with this in a way that I think your head's going to explode, but in a good way. You're going to see yourself in this, and I think it's going to help you tremendously to accept and appreciate who you really are, even though sometimes we feel we have to hide it. Well, with that teaser, I am so excited to have Andre Sólo here. Thank you, Andre, for taking the time.
Kathy, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, so excited. All right. We are talking about what's our wonderful title here? How being highly sensitive is a superpower and how to leverage it. That's what this podcast is about. But let me tell you about Andre, who is an expert in this. So let me share. Andre Sólo is the force behind Sensitive Refuge. Oh, that just hits me right here. The world's largest website for sensitive people, and the co-author with Jen Graneman, of Sensitive, the Hidden Power of the Highly Sensitive Person in a Loud, Fast, Too Much World. Kind of who can't resonate with that, right? An author, researcher, and speaker, Andre serves as editor-in-chief of Sensitive Refuge and chief Make It Happen officer of Introvert Dear. A highly sensitive person himself, for much of his life, he thought he had to hide it before coming to understand it's one of humanity's most powerful and most overlooked traits. Now, Andrew is a recognized expert and passionate advocate for sensitive people and writes about sensitivity on Forbes and Psychology Today, and has spoken at Amazon and internationally and been featured in a lot of other top media. So here we are. And are you both in New Orleans and St. Paul?
Yes, although less New Orleans these days, but yeah, I tend to bounce between both. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. All right, let us dig in. I got so many questions. It's going to be very hard to get this done in 30 minutes, but let's start. First of all, how do we define and describe highly sensitive people? Let's start there.
Favorite question, Kathy. So when we hear the word sensitive, I think a lot of us think fragile, weak, or maybe someone who overreacts. And that is just not what sensitive means. As a personality trait, being sensitive means that you take in more information from the environment around you and you do more with it, right? So sensitive people are actually wired at a brain level to process all information more deeply. And that allows us to notice things that others miss and to make connections and find kind of new ideas that others might not make. And interestingly, so the information that the brain takes in, that includes sensory information, right? A sensitive person can notice the texture of a fabric or those subtle hints of apricot in a nice white wine. But information is also emotional, and that's oftentimes the most important information we have in our environment. So sensitive people are also better at noticing that little hint of a smile that flashed across someone's face just before they managed to hide it. Which it can be a really powerful thing to have, that kind of radar. So tend to be both more physically and more emotionally sensitive. And those two things are so closely related that in studies, we found that if you take a Tylenol to numb your physical pain, you'll actually score lower on an empathy test until that Tylenol wears off.
Everyone will, or highly sensitive?
Yeah. Yeah.
What a
It's one in
finding.
the same system, right?
All right, I'm going to bombard you with questions
Do
if that's
it.
okay. Strap in. All right. You said, and I've read your material too, you said that highly sensitive people will take in the information in a deeper way. Can you explain that? And I think there's a science explanation, but how does that come out in the world if we're taking it in a deeper way?
Right. So you're right that in sort of neuroscientific studies, we do see greater brain activation in certain key areas. And so one wonderful study from 2010 used fMRIs to kind of peek inside the brains of highly sensitive people and less sensitive people. And they did it while these subjects were looking at images, and they would change the image with just a few tiny details missing, kind of like those like spot the difference things you might have done online or whatever.
Right.
Right. So they would have the subjects do that while monitoring their brains. And what they noticed, first of all, is that sensitive people actually spent more time scrutinizing the difference between the images and like looking for every little thing. But also in terms of the brain activity, they didn't just have more activity in the areas related to visual processing, which would make sense, but also in areas related to evaluating complexity in general and looking for details rather than just superficial traits. So in a very literal sense, the sensitive mind does go deeper. And that's kind of what we're wired to do just across the board. If you're a sensitive person, this isn't something you turn on or turn off. You're taking in more detail and your brain's putting a little more effort, a little more time into it, spending more resources on it would be a good way to say it. No matter whether it's what you're watching on Netflix, it's a meeting you're having with your boss, it's playing with your kid, or it's just when you're trying to do your morning commute, that brain is always doing that extra processing. And that's a double-edged sword. It leads to some of our greatest strengths, right? So sensitive people tend to be good at, we tend to be highly creative, and a lot of great creatives are highly sensitive people. We tend to be extremely attuned to our environment. So noticing tiny little differences that others might not notice. There's something my co-author Jen Granholm and I call sensory intelligence, which is that ability to just be aware and attuned to your surroundings. And that can make a life or death difference. That's something that in the military, they call it situational awareness. And they try to train people to be situationally aware, which sensitive people just are out of the gate. And we've spoken to highly sensitive service members who credited their sensitivity as being one of their most important traits as a military service member. So it's a very kind of flexible and valuable trait. But of course, the one that people often think of is empathy, and highly sensitive people do score higher for empathy as well. So you have this trait, by the numbers, it is linked to giftedness. And it comes with these many strengths, both physical and emotional, and in terms of creativity and intelligence. And at the same time, your brain is putting all this extra work in. So there's a cost to those gifts. And that cost is overstimulation. You can get overstimulated easily in a chaotic or busy or rushed environment, or when there's just too much going on around you, whether that's, too many noises and bright lights, too many people, or whether it's just an intense emotional situation can be overstimulating as well, because your brain is going to keep going deep no matter how much stuff is being thrown at it.
So fascinating, Andre. So I'm listening to you and I'm trying to split my brain in half about what does the listener want? Ouch. See, I'm an HSP. I mean, I'm going deep all over the place. I want to know what I want to know because I think I am this, and I think I might have misinterpreted some things.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you. So, and I think I mentioned a third of you will get something out of this, and hopefully everyone else who lives and works and loves and collaborates with, I can call them HSP, right? Highly sensitive people. Is that okay?
Highly sensitive people, HSPs, or we sometimes just say sensitive people as well.
Sensitive people. Okay. And I think you said the data shows a third of us are.
Yeah, it's roughly 30.
Lot.
And sensitivity, it's a continuum like any other trait. So most people are average. They're kind of in the middle. Some people are at the low end. It's a little less common. And then about 30% of people are at the high end. And that's true for both men and women.
All right. I want to ask this. It's a list. So I'm an extrovert, but I have ambivert tendencies. I get overwhelmed after talking to 100 people. I have 2 days off, but I think I'm an extrovert. So first of all, do you see a correlation between introversion and sensitivity in this way?
Right. So they're two very different traits, and they kind of you can sort of think of them as measuring two different things,
Yeah.
right? So when we talk about whether someone's an introvert or an extrovert, that's a social orientation, right? So what we really mean is that introverts tend to get their energy from having alone time, and extroverts tend to get their energy from being around people. So there's this social difference in which one energizes them. With sensitivity, this is really about an orientation to your environment. And so
Mm,
whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, if you're highly sensitive, you're going to do better in calm environments, and you're going to struggle
mm.
sometimes in really stimulating or crowded or loud environments. And so you have these interesting cases of like,
Interesting.
lots of highly sensitive people are extroverts and they love people and they get their energy from people. But are they going to do the same things as a less sensitive extrovert? Probably not. The huge networking event with 200 people in a huge crowded hotel conference center is probably going to be hard for even an extroverted HSP. But they might want to book almost every night of the week, seeing 2 or 3 or 4 friends at a quiet restaurant rather than a crowded club.
Okay, so what I'm taking from that is there are ways that the sensitivity emerges, and that's different. You can't lump, yep, if you're an extrovert, you're blah, blah, blah. All right.
Right. There is
Secondly,
some overlap, I will say. It's
mm,
about 30% of sensitive people are extroverts and 70% are introverts. So it does lean more toward introvert. But I will also think, I mean, personally, I would say that there's probably been some confusion in the research over previous decades between those two traits, because
yes.
the science of sensitivity has been unfolding since really the 80s. It's a more recent science that we've started to understand this.
Mm.
And we've definitely sussed out in very complicated personality inventories that these two things measure different things about a person. But I think a lot of the earlier research probably conflated them a bit.
I
So
see.
that's part of it.
Now, can I ask you this? When I'm reading over your materials, I saw you can get overwhelmed with too much, stimuli. You also mentioned boundaries. And I did want to ask this. Again, this is all about me, but here we go. Maybe all of you will find this interesting. When I was studying to be a therapist, I was a therapist for some time, and I also studied energy healing. Okay. Some people are going to say, so woo woo, but I would put my hands over people, and honest to God, Andre, I would see videos
Mm,
of things from the past. I didn't know what they were. And I would say to the person, I don't know what this is, but I saw a video, blah, blah, blah. And they would start crying, like that was them 40 years ago. The point is, I really felt like my boundaries were not and are not sufficient to do the hands-on work, because I would just get it right in. One time I was working on a patient with cancer, and I couldn't breathe. And I looked at my instructor and I went, and she came over. And is it a correlation that, oh, the other thing I wanted to ask you as part of this is I'm very sensitive to, I could walk into a room, a boardroom or a meeting room, and I could tell what everyone was feeling. He's angry, she's jealous. And if you're not well boundaried, you're going to be a mess. And I've gotten better at it, but I also can feel when there's negativity in a person.
yeah.
And that can be very hard. Are these HSP traits, or do you think it's something else as well?
Absolutely. You're checking a lot of boxes there for high sensitivity. And, I'm just going to mention as an aside, too, that what you said about walking into a boardroom, this is why sensitive people make tremendous leaders. It's not the only reason why, but it's a
Mm,
part of it. I think it's easy for us to think, oh, well, sure, artists. I could see a person being a great artist because they're sensitive. They're also great CEOs, right? We
right.
sensitive people are kind of meant for this kind of thing. And when
Mm,
you hear somebody like maybe an experienced salesperson saying, how they can just read someone and they just know what the person really wants or what they're really after, what to say to them, that salesperson might not think of themselves as sensitive. They very well might be. That's where that comes from. And the same thing we spoke to the director of a very large corporate foundation attached to one of the country's biggest fast food chains. And I am not allowed to say their name, but you'd
sure.
recognize them.
Sure.
And, she spoke about how, as the director of this foundation, one of her most valuable abilities was to get these potential donors that you have to meet with, which are very high level people. These are VPs of Fortune 500 companies. And, that maybe there's been a pitch that it would really, help your image if you donated to our foundation, and this will be good for this and this and this. And the person's coming in resistant and just like, prove to me why I should donate. Why is this worth my time? And, at the beginning of the conversation, they're basically just an iron wall, just like ready to say no. And 20 minutes later, she's got them just like excited and passionate about the mission, right? And then they're signing these huge donations. So it's because of that ability to read people. So I'm so glad you said that, because it's one of our biggest strengths.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to be a good leader. All right, now
Right.
I think we're hitting on the skills and talents that sensitive people have that perhaps are unsung and unrecognized, right? But I also know in reading your material, there are downsides. I think I just had the downside of it in a meeting the other day where I'm sensing so much. And I would ask you this to finish that sentence. I'm responding at a level where it's a little unfiltered because I was getting angry. And so I said things that, interesting how I just let that rip. My point here is, I think probably if you don't have great mastery over your emotions and your communication, I'm guessing that the sensitivity can hijack you a little bit. Am I making sense?
Yes, you're making sense, and you're 100% right. I think that's like every other trait, right? Any other personality trait you might have, it's going to come with its strengths, and it will come with its drawbacks. That's certainly true for sensitivity as well. We as a group, like sensitive people, we do have stronger emotions, and we have stronger emotional reactions. Now, that's great for a lot of reasons, right? That's where passion comes from. That passion is infectious, and it's part of how we can inspire people and connect with people and make things happen on a big level. But big emotions can also be big, difficult emotions, right?
Yeah, they can overwhelm other people, particularly who are not sensitive people.
Yeah.
So here you come with your big whoosh.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, are sensitive people very, how would I put this? Are sensitive people more emotionally intelligent on average? I'm not going to say they are.
I hear you.
However, I would say that being sensitive is like being tall, and learning emotional intelligence is like playing basketball. You have an advantage in it if you're going to start working on your emotional intelligence. And because of that, because you're tall, so to speak, sometimes you just get good at emotional intelligence just because you've been doing it long enough. But I think it's a very powerful thing for a highly sensitive person to start reading up on and putting into practice the things that help you develop emotional intelligence as a skill. Because there is some research to suggest that although we have very strong emotions, we sensitive people don't always do that good of a job of regulating them, specifically in one way. And that is,
my goodness,
when you're having negative emotions, are you able to see them as something that is temporary and that's going to pass with time?
That negative emotion or that stimuli that
emotion. Yeah, the negative emotion itself. And it's very easy when, anybody who is sad, they kind of get mired in sadness, or same thing with anger, same thing with stress, right? Same thing with despair. But it's very easy when you have these much stronger levels. Like if I'm feeling sad, I feel really sad, right? That's just me. It's so easy to lose sight of, well, this is how I feel now, but this is going to change. And it might change because I fixed the problem, but I might not be able to fix the problem. And either way, I won't feel like this forever. And just that simple acknowledgement, that simple ability to see that end helps you start to treat your emotions differently. And that has been found to be something that is a real growth point for highly sensitive people.
I love the nuances that it's complex. Just because we're highly sensitive people doesn't mean we're this, and this, and this in every situation. Wow.
Yeah.
You also,
if you don't mind, yeah, I'll say something too, that there's going to be some people who are listening to this who are thinking, well, I thought I was sensitive from some of the stuff you said earlier, but I don't know that I have that strong of emotions, or I don't sense other people's emotions. And that's okay, right? Because we do know that there's sort of different I don't want to say different types of sensitive people. It's not like different personality types, but there are sort of different ways in which sensitivity comes across. And there's like 3 specific ones that get
Mm,
captured in the data all the time.
mm,
One of them is aesthetic sensitivity. So you're very attuned to beauty and how things in your environment make you and other people feel. And you have this eye for, wow, if we just put this vase over here, if we just use just the right color here, and you're going to notice like, what makes a gourmet meal gourmet, or why this particular song is so stirring. That's important to aesthetically sensitive people. And then
mm.
there's people who are very physically sensitive, very, very sensorially sensitive. And that's where you're noticing that tiny hum of the fan, that roughness of this fabric that doesn't bother anybody else, those little tiny minute details. And then you have the high empathy, the high emotional type of sensitivity. And most sensitive people are a blend of all 3 of these. You can be primarily 1, you can be primarily 2, you could be all 3. It varies from person to person. All of those 3 have the same underlying trait of this deep processing and a lot of the shared qualities, but it can come out differently. And I think especially for male sensitive people, we, even if we have strong emotions, we might not think of it that way. I never thought of myself for most of my life as being a highly emotional person. I knew that I could be very energetic in a debate. I knew that I would have my really low periods. I knew that I could be the life of the party, and my, if I've got the good mood going on, like I saw all those things, but I didn't think of that as, well, I actually have very strong emotions. And it wasn't until a former partner pointed out to me, you're a very emotional guy. And I was like, well, you're right. Wow.
Oh, wow. Oh my. Oh, this is so interesting to me. All right. Focus, Kathy. I have questions based on what you said, but let me ask you this. I'll bring up my daughter, Julia. She is so artistic, and everything she does, she's floral design, garden design. She's an amazing cook. She, draws and paints and makes jewelry. But even about food, like, frankly, I could eat a boiled egg and I'm happy. I'm not, and with my daughter, Julia, food is very important. Is that part of this as well?
Yeah, it can be, absolutely. I mean, I think to my personal take, right, is that that could mean that although you're a highly sensitive person, as you said earlier, you might not be that high on aesthetic sensitivity, and it sounds like your daughter might.
That's
Um,
it. That's
I
it.
don't
Like,
know
her
for
room is
like the
magic.
way they go with that, but for me, that's true. I'm very aesthetically oriented, and I'm like, oh, let me make this mac and cheese for my son by starting by shredding a block of Parmesan.
Oh,
And
no.
it's like, why? Why would you do that? He doesn't care. He's 2, right?
I do. Bravo, Papa. He doesn't know, but that's okay. You've helped me so much. Now, I mean, listen to how this will help us learn to see others differently. So we're very different. I might say I have nothing in the kitchen. Julia comes in and says, "Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh," and whips up, but look at those as gifts. And yes, we're different, and maybe we value or appreciate different things, but it's so important what you're bringing to light. Now, I do want to say this, just throw it out there. Earlier, we were talking about burden bearer versus highly sensitive people, which is a term I think you hadn't heard of much, and I hadn't either, but I read about it. Would you venture to say that being spiritually attuned is anything that's come out in the research?
Oh, that's fascinating. So I think a lot of researchers are allergic to
Yeah.
addressing that.
You're right. It
Just
sounds religious. It sounds
right,
no, but
yeah,
I'm not talking about that, am I? I'm talking about your spirit
yeah,
underneath your emotions.
right.
So there's no research on that, probably.
Well, it's fun. There's, maybe I shouldn't say research, but I think that I can't. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a single therapist who specializes in HSPs, or a single HSP or sorry, I should say sensitivity researcher, who wouldn't say, yeah, I think on average, highly sensitive people are more drawn to spirituality, and it plays a more maybe major or personal role in their life if they are drawn to it. And I would go a step farther. I would say this. I personally think it has something to do with what my co-author Jen Granneman and I term the sensitive boost effect.
Tell us that.
This
Oh
is
no,
probably the single greatest advantage you have as a sensitive person,
I
right?
get you.
So The boost effect basically means, think of the things that that help anybody, right? Like, um, or that hurt anybody, right? So if you think about, let's start with the word vulnerable, right? Vulnerable basically means that if you experience something that might make anyone suffer, you suffer more. That's being vulnerable, right? What's the opposite of that? What is the word for you experience something that would help anybody, give anybody a little boost, but you get more of a boost from it? Well, the word is sensitivity, right? And what we see in the research time and time and time again is that if you give sensitive people the same kind of supportive environment that would put anybody ahead, it rockets them way farther ahead than anyone else. So, for example, in sensitive children, you give them a nurturing, loving, well, you can't just give that to them in a lab, but if the ones who happen to have a nurturing, loving home life in their family, that helps any kid do better at school, but sensitive kids will become the top achievers in their class. Let's look
Wow.
at teenagers with depression. If you get therapy for your depression, on average, that'll help anybody. But in the sensitive teenagers, in studies, they overcome their depression on average more fully, and then they keep themselves depression free longer term after the therapy's over because they took more from it, right?
It's like a sponge, isn't it? I'm trying to come up with a very simple analogy
Sponge, yeah,
of
right.
a non-porous sponge is, you'll put an agent, a chemical agent, and it's a boundary that is impervious, right?
Yes, yeah.
But
And
with
that's
the
one of the
porous
reasons.
sponge, whoosh, off it goes, right?
Oh, exactly, exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons we've evolved sensitivity, not just ourselves, but hundreds upon hundreds of species, is because of this advantage. A lot of people think that in order to survive in the real world, you have to grow a thicker skin, put on some armor. That can help in a tough situation, but you know what else can't get through the thick skin is support.
Anything else?
Anything, wisdom, right? So what we find is if you translate that to adults, sensitive people have the same thing as adults. And what's great is, as a kid, you can't control your home environment, but as an adult, you can control your environment. So think about getting extra career training, getting some kind of coaching, having a mentor, having a really supportive group of friends who encourage and believe in you, right? Having a mastermind group, going to networking events, the things that are going to be great sources of support for any adult. And you're a sensitive person, you get more out of it. We've even seen that sensitive people there was this wonderful study that took hundreds of couples on the brink of divorce
Yeah.
and gave them all the same kind of couples therapy program that's designed to train them how to improve their communication and save their relationship, right? And this program's been proven to work. It helps, on average and more often than not. And it did. And then when they tested those people, gave them a personality test at the end, they found something surprising. The sensitive people were the ones who were in the couples that went on to save their marriages.
Only one, did it have to be only one partner?
It
Or did
was
both the partners
generous
have to?
but even just one, so if you're a sensitive person, as long as you can curate a supportive environment for yourself, you're walking around with a rocket strapped to your back. And you just have to light it, right? And that's what this supportive environment does. And suddenly you're going to be a top achiever, or achievement might not be important to you, but achieve other goals in your life, right? You're gonna develop a happy home life. You're gonna start following your purpose or your passion. You're gonna start to meet goals that you care about. That's where that comes from. So how this gets back to spirituality, I think a lot of people aren't sure where to get that kind of support. How do I find a mentor? How do I, what, or you don't even consciously
Wow.
realize I need more support in my life to activate that. But spirituality is something that's accessible to everyone. So I think that just as highly sensitive people get more out of therapy, I think they probably also get more out of spiritual practice. And I can say for myself personally that meditating is life-changing and transformative. And it's something that I take seriously. Do I do it every day? No, I'm not perfect. But I do it as close to every day as I can manage. And it's a game changer.
There is so much you are sharing here. And I'm thinking, I'm a singer, and I think you even mentioned things like music can elevate a highly sensitive person in ways that another might not even understand. Like sometimes when I'm singing, I get
Mm,
so moved and, I'm choking up all over the place. but now I'm singing as a way of contributing to a church nearby. And I get so much out of it in that way that you're discussing. I didn't even know that I missed spirituality.
Yeah, right.
But this particular pastor and this particular music director and this particular music is, I'm seeing so much. Now, two questions that I want to make sure we touch on, and I know you have to go soon. I would like you to talk about, let me say them so we'll remember. One, gender and highly sensitive people. Number two, I read a fascinating thing about empathy versus compassion. I found, for instance, it's difficult for me to watch certain kind of violent movies that I can watch them if they're fantasy, but I can't really watch people going through. It's too hard for me. I have nightmares.
Yep.
And you talked about empathy
Very
versus
common HSP trait, by the way.
What's that?
Very common HSP trait.
I think I would rank, at the top level here of HSP. And I want to make sure you give us some tips for how to leverage the sensitivity, how to mitigate the potential, and a few of them, like what we need to do as a parent. And I do want to say, I was a former marriage and family therapist. I would love to see a study of, and I'm divorced, but thankfully amicably, very amicably, thank gosh. I would love to see how many couples divorced unbeknownst to them, but one was highly sensitive and one was not. And the bridging of the gap did not happen. Interesting. Sure. All right. So let's start with gender.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel we were talking about Mark Green. Everybody, please check that out. Man box culture, that, 5-year-old boys know what it is to be a boy. And it's heartbreaking what they say it is to be a boy. Don't be vulnerable. Don't have girls who are friends. Don't be a pussy. The word, don't show you're weak. Never cry. Well, I've got to imagine that this sends highly sensitive people underground if they're men or identify as male. Would you tell me what you think?
100%. That's, I think, really well said. So I think all sensitive people face a level of stigma. And I think most sensitive people spend a lot of their life being told, don't be so sensitive. Why are you so sensitive? You got to grow a thicker skin, toughen up, toughen up, toughen up. And that includes women as well as men. I think the messaging is different. I think for women, the messaging is don't be so sensitive. Like, it's okay to be a little sensitive, but don't be so sensitive, right?
And
for
what
men,
people usually mean is, why are you getting emotional about that? Why are you telling me that I'm being rough on you? Or that's what they mean. Stop being you. I'm fine. You're the problem. Okay. Yeah.
And I think the phrase too sensitive is one that could just be retired at this point. We just don't need that phrase anymore.
That's a quote. That's a tweetable. Don't ever say those words again, please.
Yeah, right. Like, if you really are using the word sensitive to mean what it does mean, right, in science, I mean, how can you be too innovative? How can you be too compassionate, right? There's no such thing as being too sensitive. But
unless it grinds you to a halt and you no longer can function. I mean, if I were in therapy with someone, I would say that's impacting your functioning. Let's see what we can do to, help you navigate the challenges of the world in a different way, right? Okay.
So for men and for boys, the message is basically just don't be sensitive at all, and that you will be mocked and denigrated if you either express or show any kind of sensitivity. And that's harmful. And it's often unintentional harm, right? It's often, I think,
to try to protect them.
Yeah, right.
Well-meaning people, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for highly sensitive boys, so speaking for myself growing up, I had very loving parents who were very encouraging. They also, they are who they are, right? They grew up with a different set of values, and this was not, the idea of being sensitive was not on anyone's radar, right? And I definitely felt growing up, no one ever said to me, can't be so sensitive. And I didn't realize I was a sensitive person at the time, but I definitely felt like I had to hide this part of myself. And that held me back for a very long time, right? And I can remember.
Did you have to hide it more with boys?
Yes, yeah. And I for a lot of my, for a lot of my childhood and early adulthood, I would have more female friends than male friends. And I didn't know why. I was like, well, you can actually be yourself more around the female friends, right? But I think there's this fascinating difference in how boys versus girls and the messages we get about emotions, and neither gets like really good messages on average. But for boys, the research suggests that generally speaking, the issue is that they are taught just not to express any emotion at all. And that if they do, the one acceptable emotion that they've seen modeled around them is anger. Because both mothers and fathers, right, parents of any gender, tend to not talk about emotions as much with their male sons. They don't talk them through emotions. They don't ask, how are you feeling? They don't kind of model that sort of thing, including mothers, just because we don't think of it as being this important thing for boys. And as a result, boys just don't have any kind of like instruction, so to speak, about emotions, except the one time they see emotions come out, because parents don't show a lot of emotions around boys on average. But they see emotions come out when someone's angry.
Wow.
So the one emotion we see modeled that even our dads can let out is anger, right? And so then you have this issue where I don't know how to say I'm sad. I don't know how to say I'm stressed. I don't know how to say I'm afraid. And I'll just bottle it up, box it up. And eventually when it becomes too much, I'll yell about it. And of course, we have this whole issue with this, girls get a different message. Girls get a different kind of emotional modeling. Parents will show more emotions around girls in general. And it's okay for girls to show emotions, but only certain emotions. Right? And maybe you've experienced this, right? But like, if you are angry as a little girl, that's not going to go over well. But if you express sadness, that's okay. And so little girls get this message of like, I need to show this set of emotions are fine. And so even if I'm feeling angry, even if the right thing to do would be to speak up and say that was not fair, that's not okay, and draw a boundary, I won't, because that won't look good. And I'm not supposed to be angry or loud or whatever. So instead I'll be sad and I'll pout about it, right? And so you get this, both boys and girls getting this kind of broken set of messages about how to use their emotions. Not good for anybody, especially not good, obviously, for sensitive people, because emotions are our first language.
That's what we're communicating when we're crying as infants. I'm hungry. Yeah. I hurt. Well, there you go. And you said, let's go there because it's a great tie-in. As parents, for both boys and girls, what do we need to do that we're not doing?
Yeah. That's the $1 million question. So if you have a sensitive child, the biggest thing you can do is to accept and encourage them. Here's some phrases I want you to memorize when you're talking to the teacher at school, right? You're going in for parent-teacher conference. Drop this puppy in there. My son, he's a pretty sensitive kid, and that's something we're trying to encourage.
Oh, I got a big chill.
Right? See the reaction you get from that, because some teachers will go, oh, great. And maybe they're even familiar. They might even say, oh, is he highly sensitive? And other teachers will either have no idea, like, oh, okay.
Or I noticed he cries a lot. No,
right.
we don't mean that. Let me explain what we mean.
It's that inroad to talk about what being sensitive means and this personality trait that a lot of teachers do know about and a lot of teachers don't. And it just kind of creates a little more awareness, and also makes sure that your child's not being unintentionally kind of penalized for this part of their personality that's frankly heavily genetic, and it's not going to change. I remember speaking to the he's retired, but a former principal of an elementary school, and we talked about this book and sensitive kids, and he kind of understood, but he kind of said, well, yeah, I think that's important, but I think it's really important for them to just learn to just toughen up, and you got to just learn to be less sensitive. And putting aside whether that's true, I don't think that's helpful, but you won't become less sensitive. You'll either be sensitive and open and proud about it, or sensitive and hiding it and cutting off your own strengths that come from it. So that encouragement's big.
Can I just say something? Looking at your book, I think every teacher in the world, but let's start with America, needs this book. I think if I knew someone at the, what is the big teacher association?
Right. Yeah.
I think people look at the book that you're seeing there, and we'll have a link, give it to your teachers for your children's teachers.
Right. Yeah.
Because what this person really means is if you're going to be so upset about everything, you're going to have a hard time with life. Well, say it differently.
Right.
That's not sensitivity problems. That's negotiating and navigating through how to process my sensitivity and my emotions in a way that's going to be effective. They're not the same thing.
Yeah.
Right?
And sometimes a different approach is all that's needed. I mean, I think we talk these days a lot about gentle parenting, and that is the best form of parenting for sensitive children. It's important to understand that sensitive people, by the numbers, are on average more conscientious. We score high for conscientiousness, and that includes children, right? So your sensitive child is probably someone who really just sincerely wants to be good and please the teacher and please mommy and daddy. So when they've done something wrong, they're already internally punishing themselves for it. And if they didn't realize it was wrong, just the word from you is enough where they're like, oh, I didn't want to. I didn't mean to. Okay, I won't do that again. So some children, maybe I personally don't believe in yelling at any child, right? I don't raise my voice with the kids. But maybe some children, I could see a gym teacher making an argument like, this is the only way I get through to that guy. That's not your sensitive kid. Your sensitive kid, telling him that there was a problem, explaining it to him. And of course, if they're young enough to have a tantrum, you'll have to deal with that. But if they're a little, older than that, that's all it takes. So gentle parenting helps. So does this. When there are behavior problems with sensitive children, it's often because of overstimulation.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who gets overstimulated, we've all been hangry at work, right? Like you get irritated, you start to get stressed out, you start to snap at people. Well, kids don't like snap at people in a semi-polite way. Kids just like
lose it.
they lose it, right? So if you're seeing a lot of behavior problems, it could be because of overstimulation. And some things that really help are before you go to the friend's birthday party, just say, hey, when we get there, it's at this big thing. There's going to be pizza. There's going to be all these games going on. When we walk in, it's okay if we just hang by the entrance for a little bit and you can just watch, before you run in and start joining. And also tell them, assuming you're going to be there the whole time, right? It's like, hey, if you need to leave early, let me know. And it's okay if we leave early. If you're just getting tired or worn out, just let me know, we'll go. Or if that's not possible, like tell them that, like, look, I won't be able to come back and get you until X time. Here's what you can do if you're feeling worn out. Like go sit down for a little bit with the adults and just relax a little bit. You'll feel better and you can probably go back to playing after 10 minutes. So give them those tools. And what's great is that doesn't just fix the behavior problem, which is like mommy or daddy's problem. That's going to be they're learning self-care and boundaries. They're learning that it's okay to say, wow, my friends invited me out to this thing, but it's going to go really late and be really loud. And I have work the next day. And I'm just going to say no, or I'm just going to come for the first hour. And that's the skill a lot of us don't have as adults, is to say no to things when it's unhealthy, to say yes. You're teaching your kid that it's okay.
Yeah, you're teaching your kid you're perfect the way you are, and let's do some things that help you be your best.
Yeah.
As opposed to what many parents are, kind of stressed out mess. That's not a very kind way to say it, but they're overwhelmed. And sometimes they just want their kid to be like other kids, that you like the party and you stay for 3 hours. But really, parenting is loving and appreciating what you have in front of you, your beautiful, precious child. I love it. All right, one more thing that I know you have to go. Do you have that time? 1 more 2 minutes?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've got like 10 more minutes. Go
okay, great. Empathy versus compassion in your you make it very clear there's a difference, and you give a tip about how we can, if we're like, for me, there's an instinctual, I can't help it. There's an empathy, which for me is not how it's normally described. It's that I literally am in your shoes. Not that I can imagine being in your shoes. But if you tell me something traumatic that happened, I literally feel that I'm feeling it.
Yeah, right.
And you talk about the difference. Can you give that one last tip when we feel flooded by what you're saying that you have experienced?
Yeah. Oh, this is one of my favorite things. So for a lot of highly sensitive people, because we do score high for empathy, that comes across as sensing or absorbing the emotions of other people, which can mean you feel it yourself. You're feeling what they are feeling. And that can be the person who you're talking with, who's obviously expressing their emotions to you with the expectation of some empathy. It can also just be, it's like having, it's like there's no safety switch on this, right? You're just out at a cafe and someone 4 tables over is, in a foul mood and kind of fuming, and nobody else would notice it, or it's just out of the corner of your eye, but you suddenly find yourself just feeling like really uncomfortable and upset, and you don't know why, right? That's absorbing emotions.
I think it's also, can I just add this, as I was sharing to you, when I'm sitting one-on-one in coaching or previously in therapy, it's knowing things that you weren't told.
Yes.
That how do you want to call that? I mean, people say that psychic, we don't talk, I don't use those words, that you know things that are feeding into what they feel that they haven't even told you. What would
Right.
you call that?
It depends. I think if you wanted like kind of a research based, like not a psychic-y answer, then I think there's an element to it of you're extrapolating, right? Because the mirror neurons that actually power this ability to absorb emotions, they don't just allow us to mirror emotions of other people. They're actually motor cells. These are the cells that allow you to, if I raise my arm, you can raise your arm the same way and copy me, right?
Oh my.
They just kind of got specialized as like, oh yeah, some of the motor things we see people do, like this, like a big smile or frown, like those have a lot of meaning behind them. So when we see somebody make that expression, we should simulate not just the expression, but what must be going on inside their head,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So we start to extrapolate. It's not 100% accurate. There's lots of interesting studies where they would do things to sort of like test the accuracy of like, are you picking up the same thing the other person's feeling? And it's not always accurate, but it is
Right.
generally pretty accurate. It's
Right.
a pretty good radar.
Wow.
So you kind of
All right.
extrapolate all this stuff. So
Okay.
that's what we mean by absorbing emotions. And not everyone would say that's the same thing as empathy, but researchers increasingly use the word empathy to mean that ability to pick up or absorb or feel the same thing as other people are feeling, mirroring the emotions of others. There's actually a wonderful term, emotional contagion. You're getting infected
Wow.
with the emotions of others, which can be a good thing. It's why we get in a good mood when we go to a party, right? This is like you're getting infected with the good emotions, but it can also be hard when it's sad emotions. So
Wow.
everyone has this, or nearly everyone has this. Highly sensitive people have it to a higher degree, and it can be very useful, but it also can be overwhelming because if you're picking up the stress, the sadness, the anger of all the people around you, especially if you're feeling it very vividly yourself, that is exhausting, uncomfortable, distracting, and it sometimes feels impossible to turn off. Like there's just, I just pick them up. There's nothing I can do about it. It turns out there are some things we can do about it. And none of these are oriented at turning off that ability to pick up emotions. That ability is one of the greatest human strengths because you're able to bring people together from different perspectives. You're able to relate to other people. You're able to start to act in a caring way because you understand what the person needs. Those are all powered by empathy. Even innovation comes from empathy. When we bring together different expertises or different backgrounds and we're able to make them work together and suddenly those perspectives fuse, empathy helps with that, right?
And
So
diversity and equity and inclusion and
yeah,
innovation and
yes,
creativity and bridging gaps that don't exist. It's a leadership power. It's a,
yeah. Right.
all right.
We want to keep it, right? We want to keep the empathy, keep the absorbing, or at least picking up on emotions. But it turns out that there's a very different thing that happens when people are practicing compassion or acting in a way that we would consider compassionate.
Mm.
I never thought of these two words, empathy and compassion, as being particularly different until we did this research. But researchers are increasingly using them in two very different ways.
Mm.
So with empathy, it's about feeling what the other person's feeling and sort of being in their shoes. Compassion is about identifying what the person needs and how they might be able to get it.
Mm.
Now, if that doesn't sound very emotional, it's not always, right? It can be a cerebral process. It can also be an emotional process. But we have a wonderful story in our book about this. He's actually a Buddhist monk who agreed to be tested by brain scientists, basically neuroscientists. And they wanted to specifically study empathy. And so they were asking him to look at all these images of people, sometimes in positive states, other times in very negative, people who looked like they were in pain or just crying their eyes out, grieving, and asking him to look at the pictures and try to empathize with them while they looked at his brain. Now, this is an accomplished Buddhist monk, right? It's
Isn't
the
he
kind of person,
considered the happiest man in the world, or wasn't
that's
that?
this tagline. He didn't come up with that. He don't think he'd ever say that himself, but
No, I
he's
read about him.
the
Yeah.
happiest man on the planet or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
happiest man on earth. And that's the thing. It's like when you meet the Dalai Lama, this person just seems always, unflappably
Right.
warm and caring and positive. You wouldn't
Right.
think of them as suddenly suffering from empathy. But this monk began to struggle, and he eventually asked the researchers, "Can we stop I don't think I can keep looking at these images. This is just too painful. Would it be okay if I switched to compassion practice instead?
He knew the difference.
He knew the difference. And the researcher's like, sure, I guess.
Sure, whatever you think.
His brain activity changed. His mood changed. He became calm again. And he was still, that parts of the brain related to empathy still lighting up. He's still sensing what those people are feeling. But he was looking at them now as, what does this person need? And how can we help, right? Or what
Even though it's a picture of someone who.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
That's the powerful piece, right? And we see that with these two different kind of styles or two different approaches to this emotional experience have different outcomes, right? So when you feel empathy for another person, especially if it's a bad experience, we'll tend to notice an elevated heart rate, right? If you're feeling someone else's grief, your heart rate increases. We tend to notice that a lot of times people will want to pull away. That's one of the downsides of empathy. If I feel bad just being around you because you're feeling bad, I might make an excuse not to be around you, right? Things like that. Whereas with compassion, we see heart rate and breathing rate become calm and slower and steadier. And it's not that you don't care, but you're not being personally traumatized by this thing someone else is going through. Instead, you start to move closer to them. You want to get more invested. You care about them more. You see what you can do for them.
Can I ask you this, Andre? To me, that means when you are feeling what they feel, you're helpless and hopeless. When you're feeling compassion, you feel you can make a difference.
Yes.
Is that it?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we all have our limits. You can't always solve the problem for them. And it's not always your responsibility to do that. But compassion also includes things like being able to say, look, I can't do this for you that you're asking for, but here's what I can do. Compassion also includes things like being able to talk them through it, just be a sounding board, right? It includes things like giving advice and wisdom if that's what they need and that's what they're looking for. But the key to it is you're focused not on how you're feeling from the exchange. You're focused on what's underneath their feelings. You are inviting closer connection with them by saying, what did that feel like?
And it's more selfless, isn't it?
It's more exactly. It's more selfless.
It's not about me. Oh,
yeah.
My gosh.
Fashion researcher, I love the way she put it. She said, if you hear a baby crying and you start crying, it doesn't help anyone.
That's a great example. Oh, my baby's crying. Oh, right. I love it. All right.
So the question is, how do you do the compassion?
Yeah.
It's partly, it's going to be putting the focus on the other person, and you can start to ask questions about how they're feeling, about what they need from you, about what would help, about how did that feel? What were you thinking when that happened to you? What were you afraid of this? You can ask them questions and they begin to open up about their experience. There's that coming closer together. And then you're gaining understanding of what's happening and how they really feel. And it's no longer just an emotional thing. It's not just that I feel this way because they feel that way. It becomes this thing where your mind is doing exactly what cognitive behavioral therapists would say you should do and start to work on the actual issue. You're starting to kind of your emotions are still there. You accept them, but you're starting to talk through the issues. It becomes a little bit more cognitive, and that has this effect of sort of de-escalating your own response, putting the focus where it needs to be on fixing the situation. And if that sounds too complicated, you can just do a compassion practice, a meditation. It's short. There's a secular version. There's a Buddhist version, many Buddhist versions. And we do recommend an app that you can use to do that and places to get instructions for that in our book. So you can also just Google it.
Where do we, I have come back again, please, as soon as possible, but I'm going to let you go. But where do we get all this information? Where do we get the app? Where do we get your book? Where do we join your sensitive refuge?
So the book itself is Sensitive.
Beautiful. Look at
the
that.
Power of a Highly Sensitive Person in a Loud, Fast, Too Much World by Jen Granneman and myself. That is available for pre-order now, anywhere books are sold. Great. And we also have the website, Sensitive Refuge, sensitiverefuge.com. On that site, you'll find a test you can take to determine if you're a highly sensitive person, all kinds of wonderful resources, and articles written by hundreds of sensitive people and experts alike. So check it out.
What a beautiful book. It is so needed. Thank you so much for being here. I learned so much. I hope everyone, thank you for your time.
This is a really fun podcast, Kathy.
What's that?
This is a really fun podcast. I love being here.
Oh, God, I'm so glad. So I'll see you next week.
Yes,
No,
right.
move in, please. I need more help. Minnesota, here I come. All right, everyone. My goodness, we want to hear from you. Again, over and over, I say, I don't want us just to be talking heads. We want this to make a difference. So ask your questions. Wait a minute. If I had 1 million, I'm sure you have 1 million, but certainly go check out the book. Check all the links below. And I hope you found this as helpful as I did personally. All right, everyone. Thank you again, Andre. And we will see you all. Have a brave 2 weeks, and we'll see you soon. Bye. Hi, everyone. Kathy here. Do you run a coaching business that focuses on supporting women? If so, I've got some news. Right now, we're opening the enrollment of my coach training program called the Amazing Career Coach Certification, which is a 17-week hands-on training program that certifies female coaches in my proprietary 16-step career growth model, which is perfect for coaches who want a deeper dive into powerful, proven coaching frameworks, concepts, and skills that will help you become far more effective in working with women. And through the program, you'll get access to a powerful small business acceleration program called the Rapid Growth Academy, delivered by my friend and colleague, award-winning business growth expert, Matthew Pollard. Through Matthew's program, you'll be taught essential business and sales growth information that will help you grow your business success in the quickest way possible. In my view, there's nothing on the market like this for coaches because it targets the two critical aspects of success: how you support your clients to thrive, and just as importantly, how to grow your own business to the next level. For more information, visit certification.amazingcareerproject.com and check out the details. Thanks so much for joining us today. And please don't forget to check out findingbrave.org for more programs, resources, and tips. And tune in next time for your weekly dose of Finding Brave.